Oh, shit. Here we go. Hey, everybody, it's Keith Saarloos, and welcome back to An Idiot's Guide to Life. Now, I'm the idiot, your host, Keith Saarloos, and as always, the proud idiot of this town. But today's episode is not about me. It's about a man who lived such a legendary life that I feel almost unworthy of telling his story. But you see, it's not about how well I tell it. It's about how much Fred Chamberlin meant to this valley, to this community, and how his legacy continues to ripple through the people that he touched. This is going to be a fun episode. This is something that's been kicking around in my head a lot lately because I kind of want to call it Legends of the Valley, because there are so many people that live in the Santa Ynez Valley that have helped create it to be the thing that I love so much, that maybe you love so much by coming here, and maybe you don't know who those people are. And I am going to be hopefully taking it upon myself to reach out to those people as they're getting a little older. And this weekend, I actually had the opportunity to officiate a celebration of life of Fred Chamberlin. And Fred Chamberlin, he wasn't just a man in this valley. He was a myth. He was a legend in his own right. But what made him special wasn't that he sought any of that out. He wasn't a man of titles or praise. He was a man of action. He was the kind of person who built his legacy one day at a time, one decision at a time. And trust me, by the end of this episode, you'll know exactly why Fred is a man whose story deserves to be told over and over and over again. Now, when I say Fred was a legend, I'm not throwing that word around lightly. That's no bullshit. Fred is an absolute legend in the cowboy hat legend kind of way. This is a man who seamlessly balanced two worlds. He had one foot in the rugged, dusty earth of ranch life and the other in the cutting-edge world of Silicon Valley. He was equally at home discussing missile guidance systems as he was talking about cattle feed or irrigation. That's what makes his story absolutely so remarkable. So let me tell you by saying it was an honor of my life to officiate Fred's celebration of life. You don't get to stand in front of a room full of people who love someone as much as Fred was loved and not feel the weight of that moment, especially in this valley. It's kind of one of the things that's not just special about this valley, but that is uniquely special about this valley. It was humbling to say the least. Fred was valley royalty, and while he wore that crown quite quietly, everybody knew him, understood what kind of impact he had. He just didn't live here. He was the valley. Like every fiber of his being was intertwined with this land, this place. And when someone is that deeply rooted, their presence becomes part of the fabric of a community. Now, I want to take you back to the moment when Fred became a figure in my life, beyond just being another, hardworking rancher. So there I was at our country market right across from the tasting room. This is way before there was a tasting room. And our country market is like the kind of place where everybody like starts your day. You get your first cup of coffee, maybe something to eat. It's like America on Main Street. That's the best way I can describe it. So coffee's, getting poured. People are picking up a little something to bite before they hop in, a bunch of white trucks that are all lined up, still idling on the curb at 6 a.m. And I'm standing in line, probably lost in my own thoughts, thinking about the day ahead. So when I kind of see this guy ahead of me, he's covered in dust, head to toe. He's got this thick beard, these big old Coke bottle glasses, and a hat that looks like it's been through a couple of lives before it made it to his head. The type on the surface, just another rancher who spent all day long out in the fields. But there was like something about this guy, something that made me take a second look. He didn't look like he had three nickels to rub together. And he didn't seem to notice anyone around him. He was just quietly going about his business, like one of those old school ranch guys. So we paid for our stuff, and when we walked out, I hopped in my truck. He hopped in his truck. He drove out ahead of me. And just before we crossed 154, I noticed that he had a license plate that said Fred 1, Fred 1. And I was like, wait a minute. Who in this world has their first name on a license plate? Like, something about that just stuck to me. I couldn't shake it. That was one of those things, like, the most curious, who has their first name? And it wasn't like it was an exotic first name. It was Fred, and Fred 1. I guess somebody got there before him and got Fred, so he took Fred 1. But, like, who was this guy? Like, how would someone get the license plate? How would someone just get that? Was he important? Was he a celebrity? Was he like some dignitary? I had no idea who this guy was. And that curiosity started buzzing in my brain. And being who I am, I couldn't let go. So, of course, I started asking around. You know, my old man, like, who's the guy with Fred 1 plate? And some people, you know, just gave me a shrug. And some people just didn't know. But others just gave me a little smile, little wink, said, "You don't know who Fred is?" And then that's when the stories just started pouring in. Little bits and pieces here and there, enough to make me realize that Fred wasn't just another guy, some rancher from the valley. No. Fred was like something else entirely. So the more I asked, the more I learned. People whispered about how he worked on missiles, on top secret projects, things most of us can't even imagine. You know, the kind of stuff that makes you realize Fred was operating like on a different level, like a certified genius. Some said that, like literally. Like one of my friends goes, "That dude is a certified genius." I go, "That dude?" The dude covering? He goes, "Oh yeah, legit." And it became clear that this man wasn't just part of the valley. He was woven to it something special. So from his ranching roots to his work on cutting edge technology, Fred was the enigma. He was the man, the myth, the legend. So here's the thing. Fred never flaunted any of this. He didn't need to. He wasn't out there bragging about anything. The guy worked in classified government work. I mean, he was doing something special out there. He never said anything, or the fact that he was one of the brightest minds in Silicon Valley had ever seen. That wasn't Fred's style. He didn't walk around with a chip on his shoulder. He walked around with humility, with purpose, and with a quiet confidence that came from knowing who he was and what matters most. Not to mention, his family is from, you know, one of the biggest landowners in our valley, 16,000 acres. That's been in our family for 3 generations, which is crazy. Like, they still own a Spanish land grant. It went all the way back to when they owned it from the very beginning. Pretty crazy stuff. So Fred always balanced. He was always balanced between two worlds. You know, on one hand, he had this like knee deep in the high tech world of Silicon Valley, working on projects most of us can't even begin to wrap our heads around. You know, even at that, it was crazy because some guy got up and told this story about what they were working on, and legitimately in the back, he's pointed at people and said, "Those people are here to make sure I don't say anything I'm not supposed to," which is one of the craziest things I've ever heard. I mean, this guy worked on stuff in like the 60s and the 70s, and there were still people there saying not to talk about some stuff. It was really nice because when I talked to him, I go, "So what did you do up there?" Because I got this guy in the corner. I go, "Are aliens real? Tell me the stories. I want to know everything." And he said, "The only thing I can really tell you is we would turn sound into gristle." I go, "What does that mean?" And that's kind of all he said. He just said, we're going to turn, we would use sound to turn things into ash. I mean, I don't know. So who knows? He didn't say anything to me, but like, again, I was 100% right in wondering who this dude was. So these are the kind of things that like shape the very fabric of our country's defense. And on the other hand, he was just this down-to-earth rancher who didn't look like he had three nickels to rub together. He was always connected to the land, and he's always ready to jump on a tractor or mend a fence when the ranch called. He was a man living in two realities at once for a long portion of his time and effortlessly balancing them like it was the most natural thing in the world. I mean, what kind of guy is this? So I think what struck me most about Fred was how he never let the world take him too far away from the other. He worked in Silicon Valley during the 70s, but then he would come home on the weekends and he'd fly. He'd jump into his Cessna and he'd fly back here to the ranch. And he didn't have to do that. Plenty of people would have like stayed in the world of high tech, soaking up success or whatever. Not Fred. He understood that most people miss that. And what they miss is this valley, this land. And it was just a part of him as much as the work he did in technology. So you see, when Fred wasn't, doing that, he was preserving a legacy. The ranch was more than just a piece of land to him. It was history. It was his family. It was his connection between the past and the future. And Fred saw that clearly, probably more clearly than anybody else. So there is a wisdom in Fred, the kind that comes from understanding the bigger picture. He knew what he was doing wasn't just for himself or even for the immediate family. It was for generations to come. And I think that's why I like Fred so much. He saw the ranch as a living thing, something that needed to be nurtured, protected, and handed down with the same care and attention it had been given by his father and his grandfather before him. So let me now share another story with you, one that gives a glimpse into Fred's sense of humor. You see, as much as Fred was a man of depth and purpose, he never took himself too seriously. He had this sharp wit and this playful edge that kept you on your toes. So I didn't tell this story, but someone told it at the celebration of life, but I'm going to protect the innocent. So Fred just bought this big shiny F2, which I also think is absolutely hilarious because he's driving a long bed around Silicon Valley in the 60s. Brand new, top of the line. Like, I guess what a farmer would do if he was working in tech. He would just buy the nicest flatbed he could. So he's sitting around at lunch with his colleagues and someone asks, "How do you like the new truck, Fred?" And without skipping a beat, Fred says, "It's good, but it's not broken yet." So naturally, someone asked him, what do you mean it's not broken? And Fred, being Fred, with his mischievous twinkle in his eye, replies, "It's not broken until there's two female footprints on the ceiling." And that kind of big laugh. I thought that was great. So now you can imagine the reaction that got. The whole room probably erupted in laughter, or someone went running to HR, but this is, back in the 60s. But Fred wasn't done yet. So one of his coworkers took it as a personal challenge, and this is the guy telling the story. His wife traced her feet on cardboard, cut them out, and put them in dust and everything, and then glued them to the ceiling of Fred's brand new truck as a joke. And Fred just didn't let it slide. For like the next few days, he walked around the office checking every woman's foot, trying to figure out who was responsible. And then he'd look at people's shoes and say, "Nope, too small, not you." It was classic Fred, like lighthearted, playful, but with like the sharp edge that everyone kept you guessing. And even today, the same guy sent me an email and said Fred was too good at his job. Every time he did anything, he did it all the way. He did it like a rancher building a fence, like build it straight, build it strong. And he said he was just like the greatest boss of all time. They would have an absolute blast, and they just kept giving him work, and they kept giving him more to do. And the more he gave him, the more he succeeded, which is amazing. So he brought kind of a rancher's joke, laugh to early Silicon Valley, which is absolutely crazy. But as funny as Fred could be, his life was about more than just jokes and tech and ranch. Underneath that humor was a man who deeply understood responsibility. So when his father passed away in 1978, Fred started taking on more and more of the responsibilities at the ranch. And in 1992, with his brother Willie Chamberlin, and by the way, just pause here. If I keep saying Willie, but it's not Willie. It's holy Keith, come on. It's Woody. There we go. If Woody from Toy Story came to life, that is exactly what Willie looks like. And that was Fred's brother. And Willie was a great guy too. Me and my dad would go out to lunch with him about once a month, and he would tell his stories that absolutely blew my mind. He was one of the greatest dudes ever. He was fixing a sign and on a fence, and my daughter was probably 6 at the time, and we stopped, and I go, "Oh, let's go help Willie for a second." And we went up and we helped him dig a post, and he was putting up a sign, and he's just telling stories to my daughter the whole time and making her laugh. And Willie was also like on the board of like 10 companies, like just this regular dude who grew up in Santa Ynez Valley, but just so smart, just like his brother Fred, and doing big stuff and running a huge ranch, but so down to earth, so nice, telling little silly stories to my daughter, making her laugh and giggle. And that's kind of who Willie was. And it just made me like these guys so much. So when Willie ran for supervisor, Fred made a decision to come back to the Valley full time. He didn't have to do it. He could have stayed in Silicon Valley. He could have focused on his career, but he knew the ranch needed him. He knew it was his responsibility to keep things going. But Fred just didn't see the ranch as a job or something to manage. He saw it as a living piece of history, as a part of their family, something that had been passed down through his family, and something that needed to be preserved for future generations. He saw the work he was doing as a way of honoring his father and grandfather, which I relate to, but also in a way of preparing the way for those yet to come. And that's why Fred isn't just a man. To me, he's a legend. He didn't just live for himself. He lived for his family, for his community, and for the land that had been entrusted to him. As time went on, Fred started preparing the next generation to take over. His children, nieces, and nephews, they all learned from him, taking on his wisdom, absorbing the lessons he learned from his own father and his brother. And Fred didn't just hand over the reins and walk away. He stayed involved. He guided them. He helped them. He ensured that legacy of the Chamberlin family would continue. And his niece got up there, and all of these kids, all of these now adults, of course, but they would come back up one weekend a month and work on the books and come up with strategy and work together as a family because they saw the value in this property. And like when she was talking about it, Anne, she goes, it was fun to work with Fred because Fred already had it figured out halfway through you explaining the problem, which is really cool to hear. And the neat part is it's continuing today. The Chamberlins are still out there running the ranch, keeping the legacy alive. Every decision they make, every fence they mend, every piece of land they cultivate, it's all done, with this history of all the way from, Ted and Willie and Fred all the way down. So, in my family, we have a creed, and it goes like this. We live to honor those that have come before us, and we prepare the way for those yet to come. And I think that's exactly how Fred lived his life. He honored the past by preserving the legacy of his family ranch, but he also prepared the way for the future by teaching the next generation how to carry that legacy forward, which I think is probably one of the greatest things you can possibly do in life. Fred understood something that so many of us miss, and that life isn't just about what you achieve, it's about what you leave behind. It's about the impact you have on the people around you, on the land you nurture, and on the family that you raise. So before I close this episode, I just wanted to share a poem that was read at Fred's celebration of life. It perfectly captures who Fred was, what he stood for, and the legacy he leaves behind. It's called Fred Chamberlin, A Life Rooted in the Valley. And I think it's a fitting way to honor him as we end this little episode, this Legends of the Valley episode. I'm so glad we did this. Before I close, I want to share a poem. And here's kind of the beauty of this. Number one, who writes a poem about a buddy? And I think that's something that's kind of lost in legacy. I mean, maybe somebody writes a hip hop or a rap about it, but having a buddy who's like 85 years old sit down and put pen to paper and say, I'm going to write a poem for my friend. It's one of the most gangster things I've ever heard. So here it goes. Fred came second, the oldest son, and before he knew it, his life work had begun. Herding cattle, mending fences, bucking and hauling hay, and trips to the stockyards down in L.A. Fred was in 4-H competitions at every county fair, If an event included livestock, the Chamberlins were there. For parades, they piled into an open family car, blowing their cattle horn heard near and far. They were quick to help neighbors like Midland School in times of flooding. The Chamberlain's D6 was a tool and always ready and rugged. After grade school in Los Olivos, Fred finished Santa Ynez High, and somehow those early years just kept galloping by. Fred chose electrical engineering at Colorado State, unlikely for a ranch kid, but some things seem like fate. The Air Force sent him east out to Maryland way, and at night at Johns Hopkins he earned his A. Then back to the west again, but not to Santa Ynez Valley, but to Silicon Valley. His engineering skills were right up his alley. For 21 years he kept up the pace, but when his mind wandered, it came back to this place. For us ranch-born men who've grown up on the land, that place is part of us, no matter where we stand. It's bred in our bones, it's who we are, despite where we wander, be it near or far. We turn our face homeward, whether in memory or for real. The familiar greets us, it's something that we feel. We know the route by heart and could travel it day or night. Every turn or lurch in the road we sense before it is in sight. The rumble of the cattle guard strikes a well-known chord. And by the way, that is my favorite line in this whole poem, because I totally know what that means. Because every cattle guard you cross also has a totally different tone and a sound, and you know where you are by just driving across it. It's one of those things. The rumble of the cattle guard strikes a well-known chord as the tires shudder over it in bumping a chord. Since Fred and Joanne returned, the ranch has diversified. Corn, potatoes, and squash are now being tried. Also, tourism with a distinctly Western flair. Weddings, hunting parties have had their share. For picnicking tourists, Fred played the cowboy role, thrilling them with Old West was his unabashed goal. He greeted them in dusty boots and a well-worn hat, a wad of tobacco to be strategically spat. He had a sly sense of humor if you got his drift, and a command of local history was broad and swift. The Chamberlains are a dynasty, as now you can be seen, as member of the third generation because of players on the scene. Fred's daughter Sina and cousins Mary, Russell, and Ann gather to brainstorm and do everything they can. They'll keep the Los Porteros going with Grandpa Ted's name on the gate. Their commitment to this place is clearly great. The land endures generation to generation, and those who went before are held in veneration. Fred's mother, Ailey, lived to 102, a force of the valley and a ranchwoman true. She and her husband, Ted, would be proud to see their heritage live on, see the second generation now passing the baton. His stewardship at its best, generation to generation, among us gathered here, for cause, for celebration. We salute you, Fred Chamberlin, for your 85 years of giving Los Porteros your blood, sweat, and tears. May your spirit ride on all over this beloved place, as free as the wind in everlasting grace. A poem sums it up, doesn't it? Fred Chamberlin was a man of many talents, many passions, many stories, but above all, he was a man who understood what it meant to live with purpose, to honor the past while building a future, to balance the complexities of life with the simplicities of land. Fred may be gone, but his legacy lives on in this family, in the valley, and in the hearts of everyone who had the privilege of knowing him. Thanks for joining me on this special episode of An Idiot's Guide to Life. I'm the idiot, and every town needs one. I hope you enjoyed hearing about Fred's life as much as I've enjoyed telling it. And remember, the real legacy we leave behind isn't in the things we accomplish, but the people we touch and the land we protect. It was an incredible honor to officiate Fred's funeral, or to officiate his celebration of life, really. And I'm going to seek out more of these kind of people and hopefully share them with you. Thanks for joining me. Keith Saarloos, local idiot.